Our speaker today is Emily Surmont. Emily is with the Indian River Lagoon Aquatic Preserves, where she's worked for the last 5 years on a variety of estuarine ecology projects. She received her BS in Environmental Science from Broward College and is currently working towards her MS in Fisheries and Aquatic Science at the University of Florida in the Coastal Ecosystems and Watershed Lab. Emily is a Pollinator Partnership Certified Pollinator Steward and has been leading the FDEP Titusville Native Plant Pollinator Garden Project since September 21, recently expanding the project to encourage pollinator monitoring collaboration throughout the IRL. And with that, I will hand it over to Emily.
Hi, can you all still hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, awesome. Great. Thank you all so much for having me. Honor, do you want me to try to share my video or should I keep it off?
I can turn mine off and you can turn yours on if you'd like.
Okay. I mean, let me see if I'm even able to. Let me, oh, there we go. It says I'm unable to currently, but it doesn't really matter either way. Okay, I'll just go back to our PowerPoint slides. Again, thank you all for having me. I'm really excited to talk about our new data that we have for our FDEP Native Plant Pollinator Garden. So today we're going to talk about the buzz about lagoon-friendly landscaping. Just so you kind of have an idea of what I'm going to babble on about for the next hour. First, we'll dive in a little bit into the Indian River Lagoon Aquatic Preserves and who we are and what we do. Then we'll jump into Indian River Lagoon watershed, water quality, and sort of how the lagoon is connected to our uplands. Then we'll dive into our bee and butterfly and biodiversity data that we've collected from our native garden project in Titusville. We'll talk a little bit about what you all can do, and then it'll be time for that Q&A that Honor mentioned. So if you are eating your lunch and then you completely fall asleep and don't listen to a single word I say and completely black out for the next hour, these are the two main things that I want you all to remember. Our actions on land drive the health of the lagoon, and lagoon-friendly landscaping can provide essential habitat. So in summary, lagoon-friendly landscaping saves the seas and the bees. So hopefully that silly little rhyme will help you remember that. Really quick, hopping into that first part about DEP and the Indian River Lagoon Aquatic Preserves. The Indian River Lagoon Aquatic Preserve Program is one small program under the umbrella of the larger Florida Department of Environmental Protection. So you all are probably familiar with the acronym DEP. You might also be familiar with the acronym FWC. So FWC is our Florida Fish and Wildlife. They usually deal with species-specific management, so management of manatees or sea turtles. Whereas DEP, you can kind of think of us as their relative organization that deals with habitats. So we handle in this huge umbrella, air quality, water quality. State parks are within DEP, environmental resource permitting is with DEP. So we're really the main state agency that oversees environmental protection in the state. The Aquatic Preserves is one small program, like I said, in that larger umbrella. And the Indian River Lagoon Aquatic Preserves is actually composed of 7 separate aquatic preserves. So we manage these 7 preserves throughout the IRL. You can see on the map on the right, all of the yellow areas are areas of aquatic preserve. So we have 7 yellow areas starting in the north at Mosquito Lagoon and then working our way south all the way down to our Loxahatchee River Lake Worth Creek Aquatic Preserve. So you can see we also manage some rivers, but it's mostly big chunks of the Indian River Lagoon proper, that main estuary. We manage almost 100,000 acres, over 150 spoil islands, and we do a lot of research. We also handle a few stewardship projects, and we do a lot of outreach like this. So our day-to-day could be monitoring seagrass beds, oyster reefs, bird nesting habitat, horseshoe crab populations, diamondback terrapin populations, coming giving presentations, doing spoil island cleanups. It's a really wide variety of things that we get to work on. We're a pretty small group. There's 5 of us total. So that's really cool for me because I get to help everybody else with their different projects and get really involved in all of the different ways that we serve our lagoon in the community. So really quick, we'll go ahead and talk about the Indian River Lagoon and why it's so special. You all are at the Marine Resources Council, so you're very, very familiar with the Indian River Lagoon, but I think it's still important for us to take a second and really talk about what makes this lagoon so special. So when you look on the map on the right, you can see our northern terminus is that Ponce de Leon Inlet, and then in the south, it's the Jupiter Inlet. That is a really, really long lagoon, north to south. So it's 156 miles long. And as you guys probably know, that water down there, the Jupiter Inlet, is much warmer and quite a bit different than that water up at the Ponce de Leon Inlet. So we have quite a difference in temperature on land and in the water, really, between Jupiter and New Smyrna. And then we also have our multiple inlets that you can see on the sort of right side of the map, and then different rivers coming into the system as well. So that difference in temperature and then those blends of water types, that saltwater and freshwater coming together, really lends itself to super high biodiversity because we have all of these different organisms from different habitats meeting in this one special place. So it's host to over 4,000 species of plants and animals, everything from sea turtles to freshwater turtles, seagrass, oysters, mangroves, all different types of birds, tons of different fish. You all are all familiar with how important this lagoon is, especially to us in our local economy, in our way of life here on the eastern central coast of Florida. So again, back to those key points. We are now going to kind of hop into the part of the presentation when we talk about our land and lagoon connection. So how our actions on land drive the health of the lagoon. And to better understand that, we really need to talk about the watershed and dive into this watershed science a little bit. So a watershed is a land area that channels rainfall to creeks, streams, and rivers, and eventually to outflow points such as bays and oceans. However, for Florida, I would add a little bit to this watershed definition. I would say watersheds in Florida are land areas that channel rainfall to, yes, those creeks, streams, and rivers, but also into canals and stormwater drainage. And that water eventually flows to, for us, the Indian River Lagoon. So if you look on the map, you can see that orange area is all Indian River Lagoon watershed. The Indian River Lagoon watershed is actually larger than the entire state of Delaware. This is a huge chunk of land. And all water that falls within that watershed makes its way to the Indian River Lagoon. So from 1980 to 2017, the 5-county population, so that's starting in Martin County and then going up this way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're not including Palm Beach County in these numbers here. That 5-county region population rose from, about 700,000 in 1980 to 1.76 million in 2017. So you can see this also doesn't include newer numbers. And we're not even looking further back than 1980. Just in those years, from 1980 to 2017, the region saw an increase of 1.17 million people in less than 40 years. And again, we're not even talking about today's rates of people moving into the watershed, which are still really high. Florida was the fastest growing state in 2021 and 2022. This past year, according to census data for 2023, we're now the second fastest growing state. So Texas has surpassed us, but we're a really fast growing state in a really fast growing area. And because of all this growth and all this development from 1920, which is really when we started kind of digging these canals and creating the stormwater infrastructure so that we could live within the watershed, the average annual runoff increased by 113%, again, due to that urbanization. So Florida really, it's mostly swamp. That's why we have to have all these water retention areas and stormwater systems, because for all of us to live here in this beautiful sunshine state that we all love so much, we had to sort of find a way to move water off of the land so that our homes didn't flood all the time and that our infrastructure wasn't constantly getting flooded. So because of this, we expanded the watershed of the Indian River Lagoon significantly. If we think about this area here near Sebastian and Vero, historically, the watershed west of the lagoon was about 3 miles. I think now that area is getting closer to, I think, between 10 or 20 miles. You can see this is not 3 miles inland. This is much larger. If you look down even further south, The Indian River Lagoon watershed connects all the way to Lake Okeechobee when they do open the locks for discharges. But then when you look in this Fort Pierce area, it goes all the way into Okeechobee County. So because of the way that we've developed these areas, we've diverted a lot of fresh water into the Indian River Lagoon. We also, in our development, opened inlets. So we're changing things on sort of both sides of the equation, adding salt water through inlets, adding fresh water through drainage. Long story short, we've really changed the way the Indian River Lagoon functions in modern times. So with all of this runoff and drainage, we've also seen an increase in nutrient loads associated with fertilizer, lawn care chemicals, and pond maintenance herbicides and pesticides. You all are up at the MRC, so we'll kind of focus in on some of our northern parts of the lagoon. One of which is our Banana River Aquatic Preserve, which is over on the eastern side of Merritt Island. The Banana River Lagoon Aquatic Preserve has a relatively small watershed. Sort of the northern Indian River Lagoon has a smaller watershed compared to the southern end of the lagoon. However, you all have a really long water residence time. So once we send water into the lagoon, it stays there. For the northern IRL, so that's going to be the west side of Merritt Island, this water body here, if you can see my mouse. Your water exchange is about 107 days, so 3.5 months typically. And then on the Banana River side, which is our aquatic preserve, that time is 156 days, so about 5 months. So what we're putting into the northern part of the lagoon is staying there for long periods of time. And nutrient pollution from wastewater and landscape fertilizer make their way into those basins from the watershed, which we did say is relatively small. However, there's still large quantities of nutrient pollution. This means usually nitrogen and a little bit of phosphorus that's entering the lagoon, and this can cause some ecological problems. So I think first we'll go ahead and look at the image to kind of get an idea of what's going on, and then we can dive into a little bit more specifics. This figure is from an Indian River Lagoon specific paper and Florida specific paper. So if we look at the first image, we have a house on septic. We have, it looks like a little bit of agricultural land here with some orange trees. Then we have some more native looking trees. It's raining, of course, because it's always raining in Florida. I think it's raining outside right now here. And then our lagoon looks pretty healthy. Then we continue on in time. We've added more and more houses with more septic. That's increasing our amount of runoff that's entering the lagoon. We've taken away a bit of agricultural land. We still have some native trees, but you can see this development on land is starting to impact the lagoon a little bit. You can see some changes there. Then if we go down to the final image, you can see there's some tall buildings, lots of urban infrastructure. We now have a wastewater treatment plant. We have septic, multiple houses. Our trees are looking less and less and a little bit more scraggly. And you can see our lagoon is starting to deteriorate further. So I think this image does a really good job, this figure, of showing the connection between the uplands and the lagoon. Really kind of lays it out for us. So in Brevard County, you'll have a lot of septic systems, 53,000, which treat over 1 billion gallons of sewage each year, contributing 400,000 pounds of nitrogen pollution. So that's a lot of nitrogen coming in from septic systems, because in Florida, our ground is Swiss cheese. So once that nitrogen from human waste enters that groundwater, because we have a really high water table, it's really just Swiss cheese full of water. That water still makes its way towards the lagoon underground. So that's a big issue for you all. Like I said, your watershed is small, but you have 53,000 septic systems up there as well. And also lawn chemicals and fertilizer make up a large percentage of that nitrogen or nutrient pollution that enters the lagoon. So it's estimated for Brevard County that the amount of excess fertilizer that's not taken up by lawns and gets wiped off the landscape into the lagoon annually is 81,700 pounds of nitrogen. And also 3,200 pounds of phosphorus, which we're not going to worry about as much. Nitrogen is really our big kicker. But that's a lot of nitrogen coming from septic and coming from water running off the landscape. We call that stormwater runoff. So the effects of this increased pollution is these two lower images in our figure. Harmful algal blooms, because of that increase in nitrogen and phosphorus, and an increase in muck, which I know you all are also familiar with in sort of those more northern regions of the lagoon. I'm saying northern so much because we're based in Fort Pierce. So if we really were to kind of divide the lagoon in half, most of what we're talking about today and most of the work that you all are doing would be considered in that northern half of the lagoon. I know it doesn't seem very far north, but to me down here in Fort Pierce, it does. So these are huge problems. What are we going to do about it? There are large-scale action plans currently taking place. People are working on this at federal, state, and local levels. So we have the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan. That's that IRL NEP CCMP. Those are written up every 10 years, and they determine the current state of the estuary and all the steps we need to improve ecosystem health. So that's all been laid out sort of at a federal level. Then at DEP's level, the state level, we have our BMAPs, our Basin Management Action Plans, which are written every 5 years. And again, those are laid out actions that are going to reduce our nitrogen and phosphorus daily loads. So the plan is there. Different entities at local government, state government, and federal government levels are accumulating funds and going through with these plans to improve the lagoon. It takes a while to change infrastructure. It took us 100 years to get here. Florida kind of started developing around 100 years ago, especially in this region. So it's going to take us a while to improve all this infrastructure, make these big changes to get to where we need to be. But that's what's kind of happening in the large scale action. That sort of leaves us all as citizens kind of looking around, right? We get involved with different volunteer groups. We do different citizen science projects. But what else can we do to help? What's the thing that we can do to really limit our amount of nitrogen entering the system? And I think that comes down to, if you own property, lagoon-friendly landscaping. Because like we said, every area within the orange on that map, all the water runs off land or underground in that area and makes its way to the lagoon. So by sort of changing how we live, by implementing lagoon-friendly landscaping or converting, if you can, when it does come to you, subject to sewer, those are things that can make a really big impact on what we can do as citizens level. To lagoon-friendly landscape, you want to definitely check out UF IFAS's Florida-Friendly Landscaping Program. They have their 9 principles, pretty easy to implement, lots of resources. And then you all at MRC are also familiar with the BeFloridianNow.org, and those are 5 steps, a little bit more locally specific for the Indian River Lagoon. So if we check out those 2 places and all of us get together to reduce our nitrogen loads through lagoon-friendly landscaping, we can make a really big impact. Our watershed is really big, and we all play a role in this watershed. One thing that I did want to mention real quick, there is a program changing septic to sewer that DEP is sort of overseeing. This on-site sewage treatment and disposal systems, this OSTDS, think of that as septic. And essentially what's happening is this year, unless previously permitted, there can be no more septic systems in areas where sewer hookup is available. So if they're building a new development and there are sewer lines nearby, they're not going to be able to put in septic anymore. They have to hook up to sewer, which is much better for the lagoon. And then as of July 1st, 2030, so coming down the pipe, any commercial or residential property with existing septic must convert to sewer. Again, it takes time to get all these things done, but that's coming down the pipe for 2030. So here at the Aquatic Preserves, we were thinking about, what's a big way for citizens to make an impact that we can kind of promote and jump on board with, and we can also do. So we acquired a property in Titusville, our new field station that's right on the lagoon side. In Titusville, you can see behind this picture of these students, you can see the water from our property. And we decided we want to make a native plant garden to promote lagoon-friendly landscaping. We want it to be a community garden, get people involved. And this was September of 2021. So we took sort of this turf grass swale area and converted it to a native plant garden using some local Merritt Island High School students, and actually a group of folks from the military came out and helped us as well, which was a huge help. We added 26 native plant species, tried to take out all that turf grass. We have no irrigation system. We use no chemicals or fertilizers. We use pine mulch that we collect on the property as mulch, which is really good for our native bees. We don't want to be using anything too chunky. It's a no-mow area, and then we also have all of these educational designations that you can see on the bottom from the Xerces Society, Wildlife Federation, you have IFAS. So we're really thankful for these organizations that do recognize these lagoon-friendly landscapes. Here are some of the plants that we have in the garden. Our original planting was over 26 native plant species. I don't know what we're at now because we keep adding. We've lost some, but over the last couple of years, we've really gotten in the groove about what plants do well there, and things have kind of changed over time, but this was our original plant list, at least. Now we're going to go ahead and get into the part of the presentation where we talk about how lagoon-friendly landscaping can provide essential habitat specifically to pollinators. So as part of this native plant garden project that we started, we decided that we wanted to monitor and look at our bee and butterfly populations. We decided to do this because I think bees and butterflies are a little bit more fun to talk about than phosphorus and nitrogen. Don't know about you all, but to me, bees and butterflies have a little bit more pizzazz than, let's say, nitrogen flow through the watershed. So we decided, let's get excited about lagoon-friendly landscaping by talking about bees and butterflies. So we do monthly transect in the garden area, and then we also go across the street and do a transect in sort of a traditional European lawn. So if we look at this slide, this is our transect over here in the native plant garden. It's a Google image from before we added all the plants, so it just kind of looks like grass in this Google image. But across the street is actually a turf grass lawn. So these are wonderful neighbors who allow us to use their property to do this sort of comparison site. They have, like I said, very stereotypical turf grass that's mowed. They water it quite frequently. They believe they also apply weed killer. Not sure if there's any pesticides involved as well, but very traditional, nice green lawn compared to our little bit more wild native plant garden across the street. So before I get to the next slide, I do want to say that I just put all this data together, just crunched these numbers last week. So this is our most up-to-date data that we have from when we started our program. Our monitoring program started in March of 2022. So from March 2022 to last month, August 2024. So here's what we've seen in the last 2.5 years. Our volunteers have spotted 258 butterflies. We have seen 196 of those butterflies in the garden and 62 of those butterflies in the lawn. So if you look at this graph, we are seeing over 3 times more butterflies in the garden than we are in the lawn. I do want to say that these transects are really close together. We literally just walk across the street to do the next transect. So all of these butterfly species that are using the garden could easily fly to the lawn and be using that lawn habitat as well. But we're still consistently seeing more butterflies using the garden than we are that lawn habitat. And I'm sort of suspicious we weren't able to do pre-monitoring, but I wonder how many of those butterflies in the lawn are there because we've attracted them with our garden plants, but there's no way that I'm going to be able to sort of prove that or parse that out. So we'll give the lawn their 62 butterflies. That's fine because we still have 196 that we've observed. I will say we spend the same exact amount of time and use the same amount of effort on, both sides of the street in both transects. So we spend 7.5 minutes in the garden, and then we immediately go across the street and spend 7.5 minutes in the lawn. Both areas have the same amount of sunshine cover. The weather parameters are the same because we do them immediately back to back. So there's no differences between these two habitats except for the plant profile. And, if there's any chemicals being used. So if we sort of dive into what, specific butterfly groups we're seeing, we are seeing higher observations of every single group in the garden, except for swallowtails here and royalty. Royalty includes our monarchs and our queens. I will say for these two groups specifically, our royalties and our swallowtails, we have not documented them landing or using either side, either transect, the garden or the lawn. So these are sort of flybys during our surveys. Our butterfly surveys, we count any butterflies that are flying around in the designated area or actively using plants. So our royalties and our swallowtails, all of those during surveys have been flybys. I will say, I have seen a queen use a flower in our native garden, but it wasn't during a survey, so it doesn't count and I can't include it in the data. But you can see for all the rest of these groups, the numbers are quite a bit higher in the garden area. And again, all of these creatures can go to the lawn or the garden. It's a really, really short little flight for these guys, and all of them are big enough to be able to make that jaunt over to the other side. And here's some up-close photos of some of our favorite butterflies. We have a grass skipper here on the top left. Gulf fritillary, we see them a lot. We also see their caterpillars in the garden, which is exciting. This is a spread wing skipper called a white checkered skipper. Then we have our white peacock down here on the bottom left. This is our little blue. People a lot of times think these guys are moths. They fly really low to the ground. They're really small, but they are one of our butterflies and we see them a lot. They love our open sunny garden. And then here we have a small sulfur butterfly, which we also see a lot of. Now let's hop into bees. So for bees, premise is the same. Only difference is that for bees, we only count bees that are actively using plants and flowers. Bee activity is really hard to keep track of. They're small, they fly really fast. So when we walk our transects for our bee monitoring, we look around at the flowers and then we count whether bees are using them or not. This still gets really hectic in the garden because we have quite a lot of bees, but we'll get into those numbers here on the next slide. So for our number of native bees, which does not include honeybees. Honeybees are an agricultural species that was introduced when settlers came over from Europe. They did not exist in North America previously. So we want to focus on our native bees when we talk about our bee monitoring. So our total number of bees that we've seen is 381 bees over the last 2.5 years. 368 of those bees were seen in the garden, and 13 of them were seen in the lawn. So if these numbers don't show what an amazing difference lagoon-friendly landscaping can make, I don't know what will. If we take out our honeybees, which again, those are an introduced agricultural species, so it's better for us to pay attention to our native bees to really know if we've created quality habitat. We still have seen 222 native bees as opposed to our 13 bees in the lawn. So either way, whether we include honeybees or not, these numbers are, I think, quite shocking. So if we break bees down into groups, we are still seeing higher observations of every group in the garden. I will say bees are really hard to categorize. You guys can see the little pictures on the right. They're all quite small. Our biggest bees are 1 inch. Our smallest bees are 0.1 inches. Think about the size of a small grain of rice. Those are the size of our tiny bees. So it can be really difficult to categorize these guys, even if they are collecting pollen and nectaring on a plant. It can still be really hard for us to see and to put them into the different groups. But we're getting, again, 368 bees in the garden and only 13 bees in the lawn. So regardless of what group they belong to, really high numbers of bees in the garden, quite low numbers of bees in the lawn. And you can see we do have a good spread of diversity of tiny bees, small, medium striped bees, metallic bees. Our cuckoo bees are a really cool group of parasitic bees. And then our big bees include our bumblebees and carpenter bees. If you all ever want to join us for a survey, it's really fun to try to put all these different beautiful animals into the different categories. So here's some better photos so you can kind of get an idea of what we're talking about when we talk about that biodiversity. Here on the top left is a leafcutter bee. Also, I should say all of these pictures in the butterfly slide and then also this bee slide were all taken in the garden. So here on the top left is a leafcutter bee. You can see the pollen underneath its abdomen there. This is a really large carpenter bee. This is our biggest species. They get up to, again, 1 inch, which for a bee is huge. Then we have our honeybee, our little agricultural species. Down here on the bottom left is a furrow bee. We see a lot of these. These would be considered a small, medium striped bee when we do our surveys. Then in the middle on the bottom, we have one of our metallic bee species, which is absolutely beautiful. We also see a lot of these guys. And then over here on the left, or sorry, on the right is a Florida pebble bee, which is an endemic species that is only found in the state of Florida, nowhere else in the world. There are other pebble bees in North America, but they're all yellow. Florida is the only place where you can find this red Florida pebble bee. So we were really excited to see that in the garden. That is a species, again, that you find nowhere else in the world. And I do want to mention, again, remember, this habitat was all just a turf grass lawn. We created this habitat, and now we're getting endemic species in the middle of Titusville. So apparently monitoring bees and butterflies was not enough for me. I decided we were going to go even further. Typical behavior for me. And I decided to start utilizing iNaturalist, which is a great project. I'm sure some of you are familiar, but you essentially go out and take pictures within a wild place. In the area, or in the scientists who are looking at that area can kind of get a better idea of biodiversity. We have our collection project. So if anybody goes out and takes pictures in the garden area and you put the location as the Titusville Native Plant Pollinator Garden, your images will automatically get uploaded to our project, and I can take a look at them and see what sort of biodiversity we're getting in the garden, because it kind of helps show me the number of species that are able to be photographed. So if we look at our iNaturalist data, you can see we're seeing mostly insects here at 64% in the graph over here on the left. Then we have our next highest category is plants at 27%, and then there's a remaining 9% here. So we can go over and look at this green chart on the right. Our total number of species, so this isn't number of individuals, this is number of species, is 139 as of yesterday. I double checked. So we've seen 89 different species of insects in our garden area, 38 species of plants, which we know most of these, we put most of them there. We have some plants that just pop up, and that's usually fine with us. We've also had 3 arachnids or spider species, 2 amphibians species. I know at least one of these is a tree frog, 2 reptile species, probably anoles. We also have some fungi, an occasional bird. We'll see mockingbirds use the garden area, and these mollusks are snails. There was also a category for other animals that we have 1 species in. So I think this is a photo of something that iNaturalist could not tell what it was, and nobody's been able to figure it out since that photo was taken. So we do have 1 animal considered other, which I guess none of us have been able to categorize over the last 2 years. If we then go ahead and look at our top species, now we're talking about observation. So how many times have these organisms been photographed? Our number 1 species is honeybee. So we've had 28 people take photos of honeybees. We've had 23 people take photos of Gulf fritillaries. There's that snail, that mollusk, the Gospolimulus snail. Unfortunately not native, but shh, don't tell anybody. Then we have our eastern carpenter bee and our furrow bee. Also have a lot of photos taken of them in our garden. So it kind of gives us an idea of how many different species we have, and then also what people are taking the most pictures of. So, you know, maybe what we have the most of there in the garden. At least that can be photographed, because like we said, those tiny bees are about the size of a grain of rice. So those are difficult to take photos of. So here are some of those captured critters. Again, besides bees and butterflies, we have lubber grasshoppers. This organism in the middle is a wasp. There's one of our really cute tree frogs hanging out on our beautyberry. Again, I think this is a Cuban tree frog, but shh, don't tell anybody, it's fine. Here's the Gospolimulus snail that we were just talking about. Caterpillars get captured in this data, which we don't capture in our butterfly data. And then our coffee-loving Pyrrhusa moth there on the bottom. One other thing that we do with groups, if you guys are ever interested in coming out, we like to do bio blitzes. So sort of similar to the iNaturalist data, except for this doesn't necessarily have to use photography. This is just us going out with this data sheet and searching the garden for every single species we can find of any sort of level of taxonomy. You can write bug, and that's fine. I include it in the data. So we all just go out for usually a half an hour to an hour and walk through the garden and see what we can find out there. So this data is from 3 different bio blitzes that we did. So it adds up to a little bit less than 3 hours of data. And this is what we found out there when we've explored the garden, again, for a little less than 3 hours. If you look here, we'll start on the left with this pie chart that's mostly blue. That blue is arthropods. So you can think of that as insects, essentially. Then we have smaller categories of mollusks, again, all those snails. Amphibians and birds are at 2% each, and then we've had 1 observation of fungi. So again, mostly insects. And then if we come over here to the right, we'll break those insect groups down. We're getting mostly bees, wasps, and ants. That's the order Hymenoptera. And that's great because we wanted to make a pollinator garden. Again, we wanted to get people excited about lagoon-friendly landscaping through bees and butterflies. So I'm excited to see mostly bees and wasps in our pollinator garden. Then our second largest group is butterflies and moths. Again, yay, we're doing it. We're getting pollinators in our pollinator garden. And then this BioBlitz data also shows us sort of what the percentages of these other insects are. So we have flies coming in 3rd place at 7%. There's some really cool flies we've seen in our garden, not just the ones that you think are annoying that are flying through your house, although we do have some of those too. But we have flies that are bee mimics. So it's flies hanging out in our pollinator garden pretending to be bees, which are really cute. They're quite fuzzy and round compared to our house flies. So we like to see those guys hanging around. Then next up, we have our dragonflies and damselflies. We do have a lot of those guys hovering around the garden. Amazing predators, probably eating some of the smaller bugs out there. Then we have our grasshoppers and crickets, our spiders and our beetles, all at around 2% each. And then we also see an occasional true bug or stink bug or scale, which is it doesn't necessarily look like a bug, just kind of some little guys growing on plants. But as you can see, again, we have a pretty good breakdown of insects that I'm at least happy with for our pollinator garden. So here are some of those other creatures that we see during our bioblitzes. This is one of those true bugs. It's a neotropical stink bug, I want to say. An assassin bug, very exciting. We have a damselfly over here on the top right. Then when we go down to the bottom left, there's a beetle, a dragonfly here, which again, we see a lot of. And then we have a brown anole. I think we have seen 1 green anole. I think those are our 2 reptile species, are a brown anole and a green anole. We have found snake skin in the garden, and some of our wonderful volunteers said we had a resident little black racer for a second, but no one's seen him in a while, so he may have moved on. A little more transient. Last little bit of data I'll throw at you, and then I'm done. We participated in a really cool program last week. I think that might have been last week, 2 weeks ago, called the Great Southeast Pollinator Census. University of Georgia puts it on, and it's for North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and for the first time this year, Florida. Sally Sclera at UF IFAS is the one who introduced me to this wonderful program, and we participated this year. So essentially what we did, since it was August and it was really hot outside, we went out, we put our umbrellas in the ground, and me and the other volunteers watched individual plants to see how many pollinator visitors those plants got in a 15-minute time frame. So we watched a total of 14 plants for 15 minutes each, and these are all of the pollinators that we saw visit the plant. So for this Southeast pollinator census data, we're counting the number of times these organisms landed on the plant. So it's not necessarily the number of small bees that came to visit, but how many times they were landing on the plants in our gardens. It's giving us the amount of use. So as you can see, in 15 minutes across 14 plants, we had almost 1,000 small bees. So that includes our metallic bees, our tiny bees, any of those striped bees that are smaller than a honeybee. A lot of biodiversity there in that, almost 1,000 in 15 minutes. We also had 108 wasps, a lot of flies, a decent amount of butterflies and moths. So really cool to actually just sit still and see how much utilization is going on in just 15 minutes in August in our Titusville garden. So if I haven't convinced you at this point that lagoon-friendly landscaping is really fun and it can create essential habitat while also helping to drive the health of the lagoon, I don't know what else to tell you. That was my spiel, and I gave you a lot of numbers, so hopefully it was convincing enough. But in summary, lagoon-friendly landscaping saves the seas and the bees. So Remember that fun jingle. If any of this interested you, please, we would love to have you join our team. We have so much fun. It's such a great group. We do our surveys monthly. We also do garden work days. You can come, we can organize a bio blitz. I would love to get involved in any groups that you would like me to give a talk to or get involved with. We love collaboration and we love our volunteers. So it would be great if anyone else wanted to come join us. If you don't have the capacity to come hang out with us in Titusville, you can still do a lot of great things at home to help the Indian River Lagoon. Of course, number one being lagoon-friendly landscaping. If you have any land, conserving water, being aware of storm drains. You all at the MRC know most of this, but it's always a good reminder. If you can't come hang out with me at the garden, there's still plenty that you can do. And a big thank you to our citizen science volunteers. You all make this program possible. This is all your data. You all collected this and brought it to me, and I was able to make these quick little graphs. So thank you all for spreading the news about how great lagoon-friendly landscaping is. We also received funding for the IRL NEP for this project originally. It was leftover shoreline restoration project funds that we were able to use to implement this garden. So thank you to them. Thank you to all the photographers whose photos I've used in my PowerPoints of those bees and all the people who came and took pictures in the garden. And thank you to all the other organizations who helped me develop this protocol that we use and has put protocol out for other people to use as well. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for watching.
Awesome. Thank you so much. The difference between the garden and the lawn, just seeing those numbers is so crazy. And I feel like it shows really what a difference it makes. All
Yeah, it's
right.
been a really fun program.
Okay. So we'll start the Q&A portion. Again, if you're on Zoom, go ahead and put those in the Q&A, please. So this first question is from before you even presented, I received 2 requests. One from the Merritt Island Homeowners Association and then one from the Cape Canaveral Cultural Center. And they are wondering if you would be willing to do presentations for each of those communities. And if so, if they should reach out to you or what the best way to sort of get that started would be.
Yes, definitely. So I did have someone from the Merritt Island Homeowners Association reach out to me. I have it written on a sticky note. I am going to call you back today. I was closing out an oyster reef restoration project in the southern end of the lagoon the last couple of weeks, collecting data for that, and then going through the data for this presentation. So I promise I was planning on calling you today as soon as I was done with this. But yeah, so I have their contact. And then for the cultural center, if they are able to reach out to me, that would be awesome. Or if they sent you their contact information, I love giving these talks. So yes, I will travel far and wide to spread the news about lagoon friendly landscaping.
Okay, awesome. That's great to know. Thank you. Another question we have is, are your surveys, do you have to sort of plan them for when it's going to be sunny out, or do you go out and do them no matter what the weather?
Great question. So for bee and butterfly monitoring specifically, you do want it to be sunny. Unfortunately for us, pollinators such as bees and butterflies love blazing sun and high temperatures. So we try to schedule our surveys every month for the second week of the month. And ahead of time, I'll go ahead and look at the weather and look at our volunteer availability and try to pick a day that we think is going to be the sunniest and the calmest wind and the hottest. And then if for some reason we get stormed out that day, we usually pick a rain day that we'll all go. But yeah, it is quite weather dependent, which can be a little bit of a pain, but we'll do it for our pollinators.
I love it. Okay. Let's see. Is there an online resource that people could use to learn how to grow and manage their own lagoon-friendly gardens?
Yes, so there's quite a few different resources. Definitely plug into your UF IFAS extension. Yeah, I believe for you all, that is Sally Sclera up in Brevard County. Online, you can check out the Florida Friendly Landscaping. That's a great place to start. Otherwise, that Bee Floridian Now is also a great resource. I'm trying to think of others off the top of my head. I also think Brevard County has a lagoon-friendly landscaping that kind of lays out the basic principles. And then if you have any questions about specific native plants or things like that, shoot an email to me. And if I can't answer, I'll send you to Sally because she can be a little bit better with the different habitats. I mostly do coastal, shoreline, full sun type of areas, but I'm also would love to chat with you and help you out with any sort of planning. I'm currently doing some lagoon-friendly landscaping in my yard as well, so we can work on it together.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, one from our in-person audience. It looks like the pie chart each year shows that septic is less than 1% of the overall contribution to the nitrogen overload. So why is there this discrepancy?
I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question?
I don't know who asked it. Do you know what pie chart it's from?
Yeah, it's the Florida Friendly Landscaping. There's a presenter there from MRC every year. And she has a pie chart. And I was surprised that septic is only 1% of the bigger issues.
Okay.
Mostly it was runoff, you know, as you said. And so, and each year it's been the same, that it's a smaller percentage. And she even points out, oh, many of you think it's septic. So I'm just wondering if that has changed.
Okay. So did you
Okay.
catch that, Emily?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for clarifying. So I will say, I try to keep as up to date on the newest numbers as I can. Science is constantly sort of changing as we get new information. And my latest sort of consensus from digging in is that different organizations might be getting a little bit of different numbers. So like, long story short, we've narrowed it down to septic is really bad and runoff is really bad. There's a little bit of discrepancy and difference in those numbers depending on which scientist you ask. That image I showed with the changing of the uplands and then affecting the lagoon with the fish that were swimming happy and then were belly up in the last photo or image. That is from a Brian Lapointe paper, and he just published a paper, I want to say last year, that was saying that septic is really the big issue and is much higher than landscape runoff. But then I've also heard people out of UF IFAS and Florida Friendly Landscaping say that runoff from landscaping is number one. So it seems like septic and runoff are battling it out for who's the worst culprit. But either way, those are both things that we really need to fix in order to get the lagoon up to speed. So there is a lot of back and forth in the science and the literature about who's worse. But I think when it really comes down to it, tackling both issues with a lot of vigor and money and effort is really what's going to get us where we need to go.
Thank you. Let's see, we have a question. What reduction in nitrogen or phosphorus does native landscaping accomplish? Let's see, compared with the total loading right now from regular lawns and golf courses. So like, is there an idea about how much we could accomplish if we were to convert all those spaces, rewild them?
Great question. I love that question. That is a question that I would love to be able to answer. Unfortunately, in my current capacity with the research that we're already doing in our small little area, we're not able to answer that question with the aquatic preserve data. However, there are bigger groups like UF that does a lot of that landscape oriented data collection. I want to say also that FIT does a lot of runoff and nutrient pollution data collection. We're currently partnered with City of Cape Canaveral, who just installed a smart rain garden. And part of that project is working with students at FIT to figure out the difference in nitrogen and phosphorus loads before water enters the rain garden and after it passes through. So they will have some numbers for us. Unfortunately, I don't have those numbers for you, but it is pretty well studied that traditional lawn management, typical of, like we said, traditional European lawns and golf courses, does have a significant nitrogen load. That is pretty well studied and I would, quite proven at that point, but I don't have the numbers for if they all converted what would things look like. We just know that by converting, we are going to be making a difference because, again, that's either number 1 or number 2 for our worst offender for lagoon pollution. But yeah, sorry, unfortunately, I don't have those numbers.
Okay, it's a big question. It's an important question.
Yeah.
But it's
Someone will answer it eventually.
okay. We have a question about sort of a septic alternative. Has DEP considered the use of incinerator toilets?
Oh, that's a good question. I do not know the answer to that question.
Okay.
I'm trying to think who in DEP would. If you all are curious about that, you can shoot me an email and I can find the right person in DEP. We're a big organization, but I could send you to someone else who probably knows the answer, but I don't have that for you. Shoot me an email, I can get it for you.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Awesome. Okay, we also have a bunch of people popping in the Q&A to say thank you so much, Emily, for your enthusiasm and for sharing all this information. So thank you everybody so much for coming in person and on Zoom. And thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you all so much for having me. This was great.
Have a great rest of your day, everybody.